Every business can be broken down into three pillars, three basic struts that hold up the principles of how the business functions and how it works. Now I get it. For a lot of you, you've been in business a long time, you've worked your way up into management positions. Going back to fundamentals and learning the three basic pillars of business might seem a little bit like, being taught how to suck eggs. But please, bear with us. If you don't know what they are, or you can't answer what they are for your business, then you really need to watch this video. Because every action you take should be dictated by those three pillars. I should come back to those three pillars. And also having those defined gives you the metrics in which to gauge your velocity and your traction in business, how well you're doing against those. I can tell a story, as you know, I like to tell stories, of a company I was involved in many years ago that had this wonderful value proposition, this great idea to make money. They were a startup, but they were a well-funded startup. They didn't lack from lack of cash or lack of skillful people that knew what they were doing. And yet they failed. And it's not just a whim. I don't think they had a great idea. They definitely had a great idea because they basically had the idea of this little company that's gone places called Amazon. It's almost exactly the same idea, but they couldn't get these three pillars together in their heads, and therefore the business failed. It wasn't too early. It wasn't poor management per se. It just was trying to be all things to all people. And as we all know, you can't do that. I love old housewives' tales. They tend to stick around because, well, they have sense in them. And they stick around for decades, if not longer, if not generation after generation, because actually there's some root of truth in them. Dreams, housewives' tales like you can't have a dream come true unless you have a dream first. You can't be a dreamer in your life. You need to do something to make your dreams come true. This is real fundamental principle knowledge, and one that I love that comes back all the time is you can't be all things to all people. It's often expressed as you can't please everybody. Well, it's very true. You can't please everybody. And the three pillars of business make sure you know who you're trying to please, what your market is, how you're approaching that market, and how it works. So, some definitions, just so we know what we're talking about. The three pillars of business are value proposition. What is it you're actually selling? What is it that your customers are coming to obtain from you? Why does it have value? Now, you might think you know what that's all about, but actually value proposition is quite complex, and we'll go into that. The second one is your financial model. Now, this isn't just how you make money. It's not about, how much you charge for a product. It's far more complex than that. It's actually about the whole financial model of the company that you're driving. How you're making money, what the revenue stream is, but also what the costs are and where they come from. And the last one, which always gets everybody's interest going or rots their socks, one of the two, is a thing called corporate moral set. And it seems a bit cryptic, but that one's really important. It's sort of the glue that brings everything together. And if you don't know what your corporate moral set is, you're in trouble. So let's talk about each of these in a bit of detail. The value proposition, the financial model, and the corporate moral set. Now, I know you're dying to know what this is all about, and I'm not trying to hide it from you. It is a real term. It is very important. But these are important as well. So first off, value proposition. So if we take the company I worked for many years ago that failed, that did have a really good value proposition, what was their value proposition? What would it have been? Could it have been lower prices? Could it have been a vast range of produce or items to be sold? Could it be deep market penetration worldwide, potentially with 24/7? So a shop that is not confined by location. Great value for money, ease of shopping, huge advertising potential, flexible segmentation. So a multifaceted shop. Or could it just be a low-cost way to get a sales presence on the web? There are others we could probably mention, but you've probably already noticed that some of these appeal to the end customer base as a value proposition. Cheap prices, more variety. 24/7 might even appeal to the end customer. Some of them appeal to the suppliers or the retailers themselves that we're marketing through you, the companies that sell through Amazon, for instance, because they get a worldwide market. They get 24/7 exposure worldwide. They get a lot more, but it's different from a value proposition point of view. Now, this is really quite dangerous. Both of those markets and both of the, no matter which value proposition you pick, you could have a strong thing, but they're for a different market and they have a different reason. And you better make sure that your business is catering it to satisfy the customer, your customer. So are the retailers your customer or are the consumers your customer? You've got two value propositions there potentially. Which one is going to be the dominant one? And you need to know that. So imagine that you're middle management and you're looking after the retailer or supplier chain for a company like an online retailer, a large online retailer. So all you're worried about is keeping your retailers happy, bringing more on board, making the company appear attractive to retailers to bring products through your marketing for them, and that's where you're driven. But if that's not your primary value proposition for your company, if the consumers are the primary value proposition and you make money as a margin on everything you sell, then you better behave like a retailer yourself. The value proposition that you are driving with your suppliers is going to be slightly different and not dominant, because God forbid that you do something that cripples your primary value proposition. So to keep your suppliers happy. You get to see how this is really important, that you understand what your value proposition is. Not just what are you selling, but who you're selling it to and why is it of value to them. And quite often in a business, you have more than one value proposition. How do they interact? What is your primary value proposition? And where does it fit into the commodity curve? So just to finish off, value proposition is, why is it of value? What's your market? And what's your specificity of market? Remember, you can't be all things to all people. It's not possible. So if your primary value proposition is to your consumers, you may have a secondary value proposition to your retailers, but it's always going to take second foot. It has to, or you'll fail. Value proposition is very important to define and understand. Right, financial model. That's always fun. So a lot of people think of the financial model as about, how am I going to make money out of this? What's the margin? What am I adding on top? I'm buying widgets for $10 and I'm selling them for $12. I'm making $2 a pop. But I'm talking about a financial model that's more complex than that, and it does define your revenue stream, your income, but it also might define where that revenue is coming from, because it might not be your end consumer for the value proposition itself. Online sites that make money out of advertising, for instance, their value proposition has to be focused on the consumer, because that's what brings the consumers in, but they're bringing them in creates a market, and that's what the advertisers are prepared to pay for. So there's a disjoint between your value proposition and your revenue stream. You start to see how it's fairly complex just on where your revenue is coming from, but it's more than that. Let me use the example of a services company. Services company is, you take smart people and you sell them, basically. So you've got a very close relationship between the cost per hour of hiring smart people and the cost per hour at which you can sell smart people. And everything in between is pretty much a loss for you, unless you can generate some other IP that you can sell. But consultancies, generally most of their business services companies, is a direct, I'm paying X dollars an hour and I'm charging X dollars an hour, and then between that is the margin. That gives you an idea of understanding the financial model. So let's talk very briefly about that, and you'll see how this works and how it fits into the rhythm of the business. Because rhythm of the business is really important, and understanding the three pillars that hold up your business feed into being able to understand the rhythm of the business. And rhythm of the business is about knowing what you're doing well and what you're doing badly empirically, through being able to track the inputs and outputs and knowing where you can improve because of what's going wrong. I often call it whack-a-mole. You need to be able to identify where things aren't working as well as they should and fix it. Whack-a-mole. Move on to the next one and the next one and the next one, and slowly you'll get a better and better and more efficient functioning business. But in order to do that, you've got to understand your financial model. So if we go all the way back to services company, it's pretty straightforward. In a services company, the bulk, by far the biggest cost, is salaries, because you need to hire smart people. And if you take salaries and then your fixed costs, building, that sort of stuff, lump those together, and for a year divide them by the number of workable hours in a year, you end up with a cost per hour for that year. And that can be fairly accurately gauged, and maybe put a margin on it. And then you have a charge out rate per hour, and you soon start to work out how much you have to charge and how much of that percentage of hours you need to be billable in order for you to make a living and break even. Once you've done that, you can track rhythm of the business on an almost hour-by-hour basis. You don't have to wait till 3 weeks after the end of the month to find out if you made a living or not. You can do it day by day. You can even have that as an input into estimating and quoting for projects, because you know your base costs and you know what you can get back. It gives you the metrics. Understand your financial model is very important. Now, the point I really want to stress is that's more than just where your revenue comes from. But even that today is getting quite complex. It's actually about what are your major costs and what are your major variables. Now, to give you an idea on that, let's use services again. 80%, usually more actually, of the cost of running a services company is based in salaries. So you are very, very susceptible to changes and shifts in the cost of your staff. And the biggest impact you can have as a manager is making sure you get the best staff at the best price, which is a balance, but it's one that really has to be measured. There is a point, a cutoff, where they're just too expensive, and you need to pass them by despite the fact they might be the best. That's the sort of information that you can only work out once you know what your financial model is and how your financial model works and what are the big rocks in your financial model. So, we've covered value proposition. Hopefully it was more complex than you thought it was. We've covered your financial model. That one's fairly important. And as you can see, that one takes a little bit of getting your head around, because you've got to understand exactly how your business is functioning. And the last one, which everybody is very, very interested in always, is corporate moral set. So let's talk about corporate moral set. Okay, corporate moral set. It's a fancy term, but I suppose you could boil it down to trust. That's probably the closest direct parallel you can get to it. We don't say trust because trust simplifies it too much. Corporate moral set gets to be way more complex, but it's a simple term that gives you a simple meaning, and from there we can derive all the complex stuff. So let me tell a little story or ask a question, and this may demonstrate corporate moral set and how it relates to trust. Imagine, if you will, that you've been doing fairly well in life. You've been working hard on your management skills and either your own business or somebody else's business. You're being noticed, things are going ahead, and you decide to lash out and buy yourself a really nice, Rolls Royce. And you're really looking forward to this high-end symbol of all the hard work you've done, the success you're going to bring yourself. Now, you rock along to a Costco or a warehouse or some organization like that, where you've got workers in blue-collar attire, and most of what they're doing is about selling stuff at a good price that's reliable but not too expensive. Are you going to feel confident buying your Rolls Royce from them? Would it make sense, or would you have a bit of a feeling inside, yeah, nah, no, this is not right. I know I'll pay a little bit more if I go to that wonderful dealership down the road with all the glass and the chrome, but that sort of feels more sensible to me. In that story alone, which you can probably all relate to, and in both directions, by the way. Yeah, I mean, you don't go into a Rolls-Royce dealership expecting to get a low model Toyota and save yourself a lot of money for just basic transport purposes. Yeah, it wouldn't fit. You'd go, yeah, that doesn't make sense at all. That pretty much in that statement defines corporate moral set. It's about your image and the way you put yourself forward. Does it line up with your value proposition? And remember, the value proposition for a Rolls-Royce is quite different to the value proposition for a second-hand Toyota. And does it line up with your financial model? Even to the point of how much margin do we perceive that you're making out of this? I mean, when you go and buy a Rolls-Royce, you expect that the sales guys dressed in their suits and their ties and looking the part are earning reasonable money off a reasonable commission, all which comes out of your margin for the car, right? Whereas when you go to, two cheap cars down the road to buy your second-hand Toyota, you're sort of expecting not to be paying such a huge markup. It's all got to fit, or the trust disappears. It just doesn't seem quite right. And trust me, you will go and buy from someone else. Corporate moral set is about making sure that your value proposition, including the definition of that, the primary market that you're after, and your financial model for operation and delivery of that value proposition lines up with your market. Everything is, to use a word, kosher, I suppose, seems right. It's bigger than that, though, which is why we call it the corporate moral set. It's bigger than just being trustworthy. It's actually about what image are you putting forward? Where are you fitting within the market? How are you operating? Are your colors, chrome, glass, and silver, or are your colors red, blue, and basic colors? Do your staff and salespeople dress in Armani and always have a suit and tie, or are they more shorts and t-shirts sort of guys? It's got to be appropriate. It's not a right or wrong, or this fits that, or whatnot. It's actually about, does it line up with your value proposition? A good example of this is a lot of telcos have a high-end mobile network and a lower-end mobile network. And some of us don't even realize that they are the same company, because they completely rebrand, they rename it, they have a completely different advertising associated with that, they have different people working in the business, different type of people, they dress them differently, their price structure is different, and the mobiles that they deliver are more cost effective, low end, high end. All of that is done because you could do all of the value proposition, cheap mobiles, cheap voice minutes, etc., but it's not going to work if the corporate moral set doesn't line up. People won't trust it, they won't buy from it, it will fail. Now, we have our definition of the 3 pillars of business. What's our value proposition, or propositions? Might be a better way to put it, because it's often more than one. What's our financial model? And what's our corporate moral set? And out of that will drive every decision that you make in a business. Out of that will allow you to do the rhythm of business stuff. That's mostly centered around your financial model. Your marketing, your branding, your color schemes, what sort of adverts you're going to run, will all come down to who your buyer's persona is, if you've ever heard that term, will all come out of what your corporate moral set is, what you're trying to sell and who you're trying to sell it to, and what are you going to charge them, how does it all fit together. So it's really important for you to understand those 3 things so you can behave correctly within your organization and make the right decisions to be successful. The last one in particular, if you get it wrong, can kill your business. People won't buy from you if they don't trust you. And corporate moral set really is about lining up with your market from a trust and expectations point of view. Now, I'll tell one story before I close off so you get it. I did some work once with an optometrist in England, and they had 2 shops that were quite upmarket and in very good areas, but not doing as well. Financially, they weren't doing as well as they thought they should be. So we looked at how the business was functioning, where their money was really coming from. We did some of that rhythm of business empirical work. And then we lined it up and went back and revisited value proposition, financial model, and the corporate moral set. What we discovered was that they were professionals, optometrists, studied for a long time to get the degrees. They hired optometrists because they needed them to operate the shop. That was quite a high expense. But most of their money was actually coming from selling upmarket sunglasses or frames or prescriptions somebody else had offered. They started to realize that actually they were a high-end fashion boutique for eyewear. That allowed them to hire lower cost, more appropriate salespeople for their stores. In other words, people with more pizzazz and personality and people that understood the market they were trying to sell to. They were able to change their branding slightly and change their marketing and fit to where their financial model was actually working to their advantage. As a consequence of that, they became a very productive business and a very successful business just by looking at it differently from the 3 pillars. Cool. Hope that was fun. See you next time.